Okay, we're doing Testament now. Halacha Yudzayin. Adaf she'archon kol hashana, the board that you knead dough on and you work on the whole year. V'chein areva shalashim ba, and the kneading bowl that you mix the batters in. Tzrichin hagola, you have to do hagola for it. We're not going to explain why it's in a later halacha chafei, so we're going to just leave that now. Why is it hagola? It's cold. You just knead the dough and it's cold. Why shouldn't you have leave that for chafei?
Well, what was the metzias? Why would you even need? What was the metzias?
You just kneaded dough in it.
Yeah, and then I want to use the bowl for what?
For Pesach.
For Pesach. Okay.
So why does it need hagola? The question is, why does it need hagola? You should just need to just rinse it out. So that's halacha chafei. We're not going to talk about that now. I'm just going to leave that. The Rama says, "Lo bahani bo kiluf b'chlium." It doesn't help to scrape off a layer, meaning because it's going to say in a second there's a question of the end being stuffed. So for the end, you could just scrape off a layer. You know, this is not scraping off a layer is not going to help you. And the shiloh here is not the end. This is the problem of blias over here. Okay, anything that needs klipa, anything that needs hagola, you can't just scrape off a layer that doesn't get enough. There's no deep enough. Okay. The Rama says, "V'haminik shelo l'shtamish b'pesach b'reivus v'dafin shalosh nalin kol hashana." The minhag is to not use these kind of boards and kneading bowls. You don't use them at all. I feel like even if you did hagolah, that's the reason why, and that's correct. And the reason is because the Mishnah says these things, our bowls have a lot of cracks and little holes in it. There's no way you're going to get these things clean. So therefore, the minhag is even with hagolah, you don't use it. Okay, and then the Rama ends off ukvan ispar le'el simin tafman beis yudaf. And I already explained this in Tafman Beis Yudaf. Okay, and that's what I want to talk about. That's in Tafman Beis Yudaf. So it's not really obvious, because over there it says much more than it says over here. Here it just says you have to kasher them with hagolah, and the minhag is not even use even if you kasher them. That's what it says over here. In Tafman Beis it says a different thing.
What about if I would take a knife and burn it out? Is it metzius you can't do it?
So you're saying the Rama is saying you're choishes that there's the end left in this thing.
Yeah.
Maybe if you use the fire, so you really got rid of all of the end in it. Okay, so maybe that would be good enough. Okay, so what does it say in Tafman Beis? We're going to step back for a second. The Gemara says that to be over on Bal Yirah, you have to have a Kezayis of Chametz. Okay? However much size that is, a Kezayis of Chametz. And there's a big shiloh in Achronim. What is the din of Chatzi Shir Asim Naterah? Does it apply to Bal Yirah or does it not apply? You're not allowed to eat even a small piece of Isser. But what about Bal Yirah? Should it be Chatzi Shir Asim Naterah on that also? So on the one hand, the Gemara says that the reason for Chatzi Shir Asim Naterah is because maybe you'll eat another piece afterwards. If I ate a small piece, maybe I'll eat another. In Bal Yirah, it doesn't make any sense. Because in Bal Yirah, if I own one piece now, you think maybe I'll own another piece? Well, it's not going to help if I own another piece. But on the other hand, the others hold that the Gemara compares the Isser of Bal Yirah to the Isser of eating Chametz. In eating chametz is surely Chatzi Shir Asim Naterah. So maybe there should also be by Bal Yirah. There should be Chatzi Shir Asim Naterah. That's the machlokes. So what is it? There are some the Truma Sedeshin and some Achronim hold it's completely no Isser Bal Yirah. If you have something that's less than the Kezayis, it's absolutely mutter. There's zero Isser at all. Many of the Achronim hold that it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. It's not Chatzi Shir Asim Naterah, but it's an Isser D'Rabbanan because you might come to eat it. And most
you don't have to be mevatel again. If I walk in the house, I see a Chatzi Shir.
So according to the Truma Sedeshin, absolutely nothing. You can leave it on your table. That's the truth. But many Achronim hold that it's Asim D'Rabbanan. Yeah.
And
a whole bunch, maybe most even, hold that it's even Asim Naterah. The Chatzi Shir Asim Naterah applies even to Bal Yirah. Okay. Now, so I have a question for you. If you say Chatzi Shir Asim Naterah on Chametz, so then how come every tiny crumb that I have in my house of Chametz I don't have to get rid of? It's a Chatzi Shir. It's not because so why don't I say every single? So is that what I have to do? Do I have to find every single crumb in my house? Does that mean? I mean, there's a Gemara that says not like that. So what's going on? If Chatzi Shir is Asim Naterah, why don't I have to get rid of every crumb? So for that, the answer is like this. Min HaTorah, there's two ways to get rid of your chametz. You could either do bittul, or you could do beer. You could destroy it. And Min HaTorah, either of them works. If you could just say on Erev Pesach, I'm about to all my chametz, perfect. You don't have to do any cleaning. Leave all your chametz all over the place. The Chacham said you have to do both. Chacham said you can't do one. You can't get rid of your chametz and not do bittul, and you can't do bittul and not do beer. You have to do both. So on here, the Chacham made an exception. When you have chametz, which is so small that it's less than a Kezayis, and it's something that's dirty or something that nobody would want to eat. Okay, something like a crumb. It's something so small that nobody would ever want to eat that thing. So then we say, since it's inherently possible, I mean, it has no Kashrus. It's not like a pretzel. If it had a little pretzel, someone might come to eat it, and you have to get rid of it and do bittul. But if it's so small that no one would eat it, like a rolled up cookie that's under my bed, and it's less than a Kezayis, then I don't have to. Then I could do either one. I could do bittul or beer. I could just do bittul. And but if the piece is bigger than a Kezayis, the Rashi says it has a certain chashivas to it, and bittul alone is not going to do it just. Okay. So therefore, if I have a tiny bit of chametz, so even though we would say chatzis asur min haTorah, it really would be asur. Min hadin, it would be asur. But this din, the special din rabbanan that I have to do bittul and beer for everything, that I don't have to do for that. And therefore, it's a bittul. So if I got rid of anything that's bigger than a Kezayis, so anything that's like reasonable, someone might eat, it's a chash somebody might eat if they find it. So then I can just do bittul on the rest of the things. Okay, so I say when I tell my kids to do the biggest chametz, what are you looking for? You look for things that are either a Kezayis, or if you find a whole jelly bean that if they would find it under the bed, they would eat it. That's Yimuchur, even though it's less than a Kezayis, Yimuchur to get rid of it. But anything dirty or anything bigger than a Kezayis, then Yimuchur to get rid of it. Okay. As an aside, there are two shittas that are not generally accepted. Okay. One is a Chai Adam who says that the Rabbanon you have to get rid of these. There's like an extra din Rabbanon to get rid of these things that are pachas mikazayis that no one will eat, which is not accepted. And there's a Chazon Ish who says no, you don't have to get rid of it. But there's another thing that says that if you have chametz in your house, that's not even yours. A guy has chametz in your house, there's a din you have to put a wall around it. So Chazon Ish says that's a din that anytime there's chametz around, that even if you're allowed to keep it, there's a special thing you have to put up a wall around it. So he says these crumbs you have to put up a wall around it also. So you have to put a wall around your svarim, let's say, because there might be a crumb of chametz in it. Okay? That's also generally not accepted like that. Okay.
He put a wall around the svarim.
So they put a sheet. They put a sheet around it because in case places where you can't get the crumbs, that was again. I told you it's not generally accepted. Okay. Most people say the Gemara says that you don't have to get rid of it. You could just do bittul alone. That's good enough. And most people hold that means it's completely mutter. Okay.
I just can't see the Chazon Ish going the ganze Pesach on svarim.
No, so they have special Pesach svarim. Okay, Pesach svarim. Okay. So now. And I'll throw one last thing in this Inyan. This is where the din says Yisrael Kedoshim that people have a special chumrah Pesach that they try to get rid of even these tiny bits that you don't have to. I mean, these things that are less than a Kezayis and are not something that somebody would want to eat if they would find it. It's Yisrael Kedoshim. It's a mila to get rid of it, but you're not mechuyev to get rid of it. Okay. Okay. So before we get back to the din we were doing, there's two pratim in this din. And I told you that it has to be more than that if it's more than a Kezayis, then it doesn't make a difference even if nobody would want to eat it. You have to get rid of it. There's two important parts of this thing. One is any food that's in one kli is mitzdarf. When we say the shir is a Kezayis, that means this: if I have a bottle of medicine, okay, of chewable pills, okay, let's say tums, okay, they're not. Let's say there will be chametz in them. Even though each one of the tums is not a Kezayis, but if in the entire container there's a Kezayis worth of chametz, then I've been mechuyev to get rid of it. We say that the Gemara says they're all mitzdarf, and that's considered you do have a Kezayis. I have 50 pills in there that would be considered Kezayis, and you'd be mechuyev to get rid of it. So that means is. Remember, we're talking about chametz that's not really so desirable to eat in b'chutz get rid of it. So that means is that in the din, Shulchan says that's the din tafna base. If you have a bowl that you do mixing in, or you have a basket for bread or a container for flour, so the Mechaber says since there might be in those little pieces left, there might be altogether a Kezayis. So not only then it's starved. Even though nobody would want to eat it, who's going to eat the crumbs from the bottom of this flour basket? You're mechuyev to get rid of it to the point that the Mechaber says you should give it to a guy. Because how are you going to get rid of it? Like we just saw in our din, you can't clean these things; it's too hard to clean. So you're mechuyev. The Mechaber says you should go ahead and give it to a guy because you can't get rid of it. Okay, for us, my house, a flour container is a plastic container. It's easy to rinse out. You can get it clean as anything. But for us, it means that if I have a bread machine, okay, so that has.
Even though
we're not on that what?
Don't some more.
So that was the din in our din, Taflin Alf, was that you don't use it on Pesach, even if you clean it. But I'm talking about the Mechaber says that you have to be choishes as a Kezayis b'tzura for all the pieces in there, and therefore you have to get rid of it. You have to give it to a guy so that we can get those things clean. That's not our chashash. But if you have a toaster, so all the pieces that are in there are mitzar through shit. Then mitzar through shit. If I have a bread machine, and this is what I won't share from our business. You don't think of this. your vacuum cleaner bag. Okay, so in the vacuum cleaner bag is all the crumbs that you brought in. Now those crumbs you're not going to get rid of. Each crumb by itself, it's less than a Kezayis. But if you put them all into one bag together, now they're mitzaref. So as long as they're edible, which they are, so then now they're mitzaref. So that would be a series of a kli that you're going to get rid of. Okay. Before Yom. Now the next, in addition, there's a second exception, which is that dough, not finished things, dough has a stricter din. That there we say that if you sweep together a bunch of little crumbs of dough, crumbs of bread, they just become a pile of crumbs of bread. If you sweep together crumbs of dough, they will clump together into a bigger piece. So the Gemara says, if you have crumbs of dough, then it starts even in a whole house, not just in one kli. If I have crumbs of dough spread around the house, then it starts. Now, in a regular house, that's not negated. How much dough do you have laying around your house? Nothing. Maybe there's a little piece in your kitchen, so either it's not a Kezayis or you get rid of it. But it means is if you have a bakery, okay, so in a bakery where there might be dough any place, so there they have that. There's a syrup of not just of things that are in one kli, anything that's in the entire room. Okay, all that stuff is considered mitzurah to make it that it's to say you have more than Kezayis. Now again, even though it's not something that somebody would want to eat, but there's two ways. You either mechuyes to get rid of it if it's more than a Kezayis, or if it's something that someone would want to eat. So in a bakery, if they want to clean up the Pesach, I'm not talking about to make Pesach food. They want to get rid of Bal Yirah. They shouldn't be swept with chametz up in their thing. They have to get rid of the syrup, not only of a syrup in a kli of a little flour that's in a kli or a bunch of cookies. They have to do syrup of dough spread around the whole building. Okay.
And that may be very difficult.
Oh yes, it is quite difficult. So the people, many bakeries just give up and they say forget it, and they just sell the whole thing. They just forget it. What can I do? They just give up on the whole thing. Okay, a person who wants to do it correctly, so they have to clean. What can they do? So they'll start cleaning a couple days before, and no one's buying challah at that point anymore, and they just give up and they'll clean the whole place. Okay. Now I have to tell you before I continue that everything that I just told you explains to you the dinim in Tafman base. Tafman base is halacha Zayin, Chet, and Yud Aleph. That's what I'm always talking about. All of those dinim that I told you is what I believe is the simple way to read those dinim. It's the way the Mishnah Berurah reads those dinim. It's the way Rabbi Belsky thought those dinim were. And most people who you speak to think that that's what the din says. It's Gemara. It's based on Gemara and din. Rabbi Shafter has a completely different way of looking at those dinim. I have to tell you, he has an absolutely different way of looking at it. According to him, there's syrup in many, many more cases than what I told you. Okay. He doesn't call it syrup. He says if a guy owns chametz in his words, he wrote this, two different continents in South Africa and Alaska, there's potential for it being over on the north. Okay, I'm not talking about history. He has his own way of looking at these dinim. Most people do not read it, including Mishnah Berurah, do not read the dinim the way he does. Okay. Now, if you go to a house, a person, we're talking about here whether the person's over on Bal Yirah by a tier of those the chametz that's there. The general rule is that in order for something to be considered chametz of a Pesach, the rule is if you were over on Bal Yirah midaraisa, then the food is also after Pesach. If you were not over on Bal Yirah midaraisa, the food would have been considered mutter and it wouldn't have been Bal Yirah. Then you're not over. Then the food is not considered chametz of a Pesach. Okay, that's the general rule of how you decide whether it is or is not. Okay, so now back to I had a container of tums, and they were chametz or an antacid that was chewable, was edible, and had in the entire container there was a Kezayis worth of chametz. And I searched over on Bal Yirah. We have a syrup in the kli. It's considered to be all one thing together. I was over on Bal Yirah. That chametz would be also after Pesach. What happens if I have less than that? I don't have a syrup in the kli. Okay, I have one antacid sitting in that jar. Okay, or before Pesach I'm smart and I open it, take it out of the container. Once it's out of the container, there's no syrup anymore. So now I have 50 tums sitting on the table over there. Okay, so and I left that over Pesach. So would the person be over on Bal Yirah midaraisa to keep that? So the Mishnah Berurah says, he says no. He says you went over on Bal Yirah midaraisa. He says since he didn't have a Kezayis, so there was no Bal Yirah. So now that's what the Mishnah Berurah says. It's not also midaraisa to have kept that, and therefore it's not considered chametz of Pesach. So, or in our case, in the bowl, if the bowl didn't have a Kezayis, well, okay, I'm going to skip the bowl. Yeah. So the question on this is, what's hard to understand on this is that what was the reason for why we said if the person has less than Kezayis of Chametz, he's allowed to keep it. Because if he has less than Kezayis of Chametz, it's just usually you have to do beer and bittul on your Chametz. Here we're letting you get away with bittul. We're saying you don't have to do beer and bittul, you can do just bittul. Okay? But that rule only applies when the thing is, we said, is inherently inedible and not inedible. It's not desirable. Okay? It's something rolled up under your bed. No one's going to want to eat it. So then that thing is inherently nobody wants to eat this thing. So then Chazal let you get off the hook. You don't have to do bittul and beer. But these things, these are food items. The case of the Mishnah we're talking about is much more than a medicine. It's a matter of real food. So the thing, it's a food item. So the guy who got this thing in front of him, it's not inherently possible. It's something that someone would eat. So I don't understand. So I don't know why he says he's not muchid. Okay, let's leave that. And not one exception to the rule. An exception to the rule of, I said to you the rule is, if you're over by your midaraisa, then you're mechuyev, then the thing is considered chametz of love Pesach. There's one exception to that rule, that you could be over by your only midrabanan, and yet there's still the chametz of love Pesach. And that is, if the chametz was a maimed for the food. So for example, when you, an example of making whiskey. When you make whiskey, you have to use 2 times that you use enzymes in making a whiskey, microorganisms to make whiskey. The first is you use something called an amylase, which breaks
What?
Amylase, which breaks down the starch into sugar. Okay, you take corn. Let's say you want to make whiskey out of corn. You want to make bourbon, so you have to break the corn down into sugars made from a starch, a bland starch of corn, into corn syrup. Okay, you make it into a corn syrup. So you use something called amylase. It's kind of enzyme, and that is commonly or traditionally made from barley. Okay, that's how you make that thing. So when you take corn, like sweet corn that you have in your head, like a corn on the cob, and turn that into corn syrup, so that's considered a hamada. You just turned a solid, bland food into a liquid, sweet food. That's considered a hamada. So you would just mine it with chametz. So now, if you then continue to make whiskey, that whiskey had a hamada of chametz. The amount of chametz in there is tiny. It's an amount that would be bottle. So midaraisa, that would be mutter to eat on Pesach, and mutter to keep it, of course. But since it had a maimed of chametz with midrabanan, it's not bottle. The Mishnah says even though it's only midrabanan, not bottle, it's still chametz of Pesach. That still makes it chametz of Pesach. Or there's another way, another microorganism that you use, which is now that you have your corn syrup, how does it turn into whiskey? Okay, so you need yeast to ferment it from sugar into alcohol. Okay, so it goes from being corn syrup into being something along the lines of wine, and then eventually to becoming whiskey. So that's also considered a hamada. Okay, that's also considered a hamada to change it from corn syrup into whiskey. That's a dramatic change in the food. So again, if the yeast used for that was a brewer's yeast, okay, or use some other kind, or yeast grown on chametz, you did it with chametz, so you again had a hamad of chametz. So even though the thing is corn, the thing is 100%, you ended up making bourbon and it's 100% corn. If the hamada was done, and there are 2 potential hamadas here, were done with chametz, then it's usher. It's for sure you're not going to drink it. It has a maimed of chametz, and according to the Mishnah, that's considered usher if the Pesach, if the chametz of Pesach. Even though it's 100% corn, okay, the thing is completely corn. Okay, so now it should depend on what we talked about beforehand. What we said is a shiloh whether if you have less than a Kezayis of Chametz, whether you're over and bal you're on that. Okay, I'm not talking about whether it's a hamada. I'm talking about is now how much chametz is in the bottle of bourbon. Okay, the bottle of bourbon has got 10 ounces are in there. How much chametz is in of that 10 ounces? How much of chametz is in there? Maybe a quarter of an ounce. How much amylase did you put into this thing? A tiny amount, a tenth of an ounce. How much is in this thing? So there's less than the Kezayis worth of chametz in this container. So we said at the beginning there's a machlokes now. Some hold that there's a Trumas Hadeshin holds there's absolutely no issue to hold something that has tochas mikazayis of chametz. Okay, that's not accepted. There's many hold that it's also midrabanan, and most hold that it's also midrabanan. There's chatzis also minatorah on bal yirah. So if you hold that it's only also midrabanan, because if it's tochas mikazayis only also midrabanan to keep it, so then you're right. The person was over on bal yirah, but it's only bal yirah midrabanan. Because of the hamada that would have made it also to Pesach. But in the bottle, there's less than a Kezayis of Chametz. So then it wouldn't be also to Pesach. Okay, according to most who hold that it is chasish osir min Torah and it's osir midaraisa to own that chametz on Pesach. So then it would have to be osir as chametz tova of Pesach, because even though it was only a maimin, which would be bottom midaraisa, and even though it's pachos mikazayis, if you hold that chasish osir min Torah on Bal Yirah, then this stuff is osir midaraisa, and the person was over Bal Yirah midaraisa to keep this, sort of midaraisa to keep it. Excuse me, the will be also as chametz tova Pesach. Okay, now if I could just remind you where I am, we were back to pulling back to Tufton now. The Ramah said, they know that, I know that. That's why I'm reminding them that the Ramah said that there's a minute to not kasher these kind of kelim. These kelim that are used for dough and flour and things like that have serious chametz with these little cracks and crevices. The Ramah says the minhag is to not cash, even if you kasher. But he tells you to go look in Tufton Membeis, which is what we were talking about, which is that Kenza you're not allowed to keep it in most of those, not even allowed to keep it in most of those cases, either, let alone that you should use it for Pesach.